Overseas investors are leaving China in large numbers. Between April and June, overseas firms pulled out $15 billion taken out from the Chinese economy. This is a record exit.
China's manufacturing purchasing managers index declined to 49.2 last month from 51.9 in March.
China has been known for a long time as the world's industrial powerhouse. Think about the things you wear or the gadgets you have in your home. It's very likely that a lot of these things were either made fully in China or went through different stages of production there. There is an undeniable link between the genes on your legs and the complex circuitry in your smartphone. Any conversation about global manufacturing would be incomplete without mentioning China's key role, or at least it was until lately. China became the world's manufacturing giant and became very rich very quickly. But the force that made this possible is slowly fading away. China's position as the world's manufacturing hub is weakening, and the country is facing a problem that could have a big effect on its GDP and reputation around the world. We will talk more about this subject today, and if you think this problem only affects the clothes you wear or the silk blouses you wear over your shoulders, you're wrong. China's manufacturing problem could change the balance of power in the world for generations to come. It's not a fabrication. This is the harsh truth. Stay with me, and I'll take you on an interesting journey. China has been the world's biggest manufacturer for as long as most people can remember. In fact, China makes up almost 30% of all the goods made in the world. Just one country makes up almost a third of the world's manufacturing. The World Economic Forum has confirmed this. According to statistics released by the UN Statistics Division, China made up 28% of the world's manufacturing output in 2018. This puts China more than 10 percentage points ahead of the US, which used to have the world's biggest manufacturing sector but lost that title to China in 2010. As China's meteoric rise continued, it quickly picked up the manufacturing baton and ran with it. At a rate that had never been seen before, factories popped up all over the country, increasing its manufacturing ability and GDP. China's manufacturing industry added almost $4 trillion in value to the country's economy by 2018, making up almost 30% of the country's GDP. To understand how big this number is, just look at how little manufacturing added to the US economy, only 11% of the GDP. What a big difference. A big reason for this difference is that a lot of US industrial work was sent to China. China was not only trusted by the US, many other countries also sent their manufacturing to China, where many big companies set up shop. But why China? Why not keep the production inside their own country's borders? China's meteoric rise in manufacturing was caused by a number of interconnected causes. China had a big edge because it had cheap labor, strong business ecosystems, few rules that people had to follow, low taxes and duties, and competitive currency practices. All of these things worked together to make the perfect recipe, or maybe the perfect factory that was almost impossible to beat on a world level. Because of this, countries like the US started to put less money into their own manufacturing sectors because they thought it would be cheaper to send production to China. This change pushed China's manufacturing sector to new heights, but it also sped up the fall of local industries and caused factories in these countries to shut down. We have proven beyond a doubt that China is the world's industrial hub and looked into the factors that made it so much stronger. Now let's look into the strange events that have put this huge manufacturing company in a tough spot. But before that, it's important to know how China changed the political scene by using its manufacturing power. If you understand how China used its power on the world stage, you'll have a better idea of what's at stake in this terrible industry crisis. It's not just about money. China is now a giant that has an impact on the whole world. But a lot of its success on the world stage comes from its economic successes, which were mostly driven by its manufacturing industry. In fact, it's not too much of a stretch to say that China has changed the world's politics more than any other country in modern times. China quickly changed its economy from a low-cost factory to a world leader in advanced technologies after its manufacturing boom. This changed global supply lines. It wasn't a mistake that this changed. China's strategic growth has given it perks around the world that are on par with, or even better than those of the US. China has become the main trading and development partner for emerging economies in Asia, Africa, and Latin America through smart international relations. Africa, in particular, has been a key part of China's rise, which has made the country even more powerful on the world stage. There are 4 main strategy goals that China has been pursuing in Africa. Its main goal has been to get to natural riches, especially oil and gas. China is expected to soon import more oil than the US, which shows how important these resources are to its continued rise and how much power China is becoming. China is putting a lot of money into the oil industries of countries like Sudan, Angola, and Nigeria to make sure it has a steady supply of resources in the future. These investments are supported by China's economic ties. Second, these investments aren't just for resources. China sees Africa as a huge market for its goods. This is very important because China wants to move its economy away from businesses that need a lot of workers, and wages are going up at home too. China wants more than just economic benefits from Africa. It also wants to be seen as a legitimate political power. The Chinese government thinks that improving relations between China and Africa will increase its influence around the world, and this view is turning out to be true. In order to get Chinese aid and investment, most African governments have to agree with Beijing's One China strategy. After all, Taiwan is just an island country, not a billion-dollar help package, right? Lastly, China wants to play a more positive role in keeping the area stable. One reason for this is to reduce security risks that could hurt its economic interests in Africa. Therefore, a lot of African countries depend on China for important help, like government recognition, economic growth, and investments in infrastructure. How China interacts with African countries is truly exceptional, even surpassing what the US can do. This is possible thanks to the resources it has built up through its impressive manufacturing sector. China's method is different. It works with African countries economically without giving them short, condescending lessons on how to run their governments, which is usually part of European and American aid packages. Although many Western aid programs have political demands connected to them, China's financial aid is given without any of those conditions. Furthermore, China is ready to support risky projects and ventures in remote places, something that Western governments and businesses usually avoid. China is giving money, so it doesn't matter if dishonest leaders take advantage of these chances to make money for themselves. China has built strategic partnerships around the world, thanks to its strong economy, which is based on its manufacturing prowess. Because it is so strong in this area, it has a big geopolitical edge that makes it an unmatched superpower. For example, many African countries have joined forces with China because they see the benefits of backing its global goals. But China's economic strength also has effects on the rest of the world. As more countries depend on China's manufacturing skills to make cheap goods, China has gained a lot of power, which it has sometimes used to its advantage. China has become more aggressive on the world stage since President Xi and the Chinese Communist Party took charge. Its stance on Taiwan, its territorial disputes in the South China Sea, and its attempts to modernize its military all show how assertive it is. This shows that its economic strength will have far-reaching geopolitical effects. Russia recently used its military to attack an independent country, so it's possible that China will also use its economic and military power in this way. Some people think that China might be looking at what Russia did as an example of when they might invade Taiwan. As the economic leader of BRICS, China is changing the world order in ways that are hard to predict. It is clear that China has had a big impact on world politics. This is mostly because of the economic power it got from its manufacturing sector, which has given it both economic benefits and a lot of power. Now that we've talked about how manufacturing has had a huge effect on China's rise, let's look at the country's current manufacturing problem and what it might mean. This is the part of the story that gets really interesting. China's manufacturing problem didn't happen all of a sudden. It was caused by a lot of things coming together over the past few years. We won't go into detail about every small problem, but we should talk about two big problems that have gotten worse since the manufacturing sector has been going down. The United States is the first of these worries. After all, what is a story about China without some US competition? China has become the United States' main rival in the changing world, thanks to its strong manufacturing industry and growing economy. When purchasing power parity, PPP, is used to compare the two countries, China is better than the US. The competition between the two countries makes things tense. A huge $2.5 trillion worth of goods were exported by China in 2019. The US was the biggest buyer, taking in almost 20% of that amount. For the United States, though, buying so much from a competitor is not a good thing, so the government put a 25% tax on some Chinese goods. These tariffs were mostly a response to trade gaps with China. They came with limits on China's access to advanced US technologies, worries about foreign investments that could threaten national security, and claims that China was unfairly trading with the US. As expected, China's answer to the US tariffs was strong, which caused a big drop in the economy. When a big importer cuts back on purchases, it has a big effect. The US moves, which were meant to address domestic issues, had a big impact on the global supply chain and slowed the growth of China's manufacturing sector. China had to deal with problems and disruptions when demand dropped quickly from such a big market. The trade war that followed between the two biggest economies was very bad. It shook up the world's financial markets and made relationships tough. Even though the trade war has calmed down a bit, it has turned into a more cautious Cold War environment. Relations between diplomats are still weak, and only a thin layer of communication is keeping the peace. Even though President Joe Biden took office, not much has changed in the United States. Even though the US business community has asked for a calm down in relations with China, Biden's government has carried on and even stepped up the policies of his predecessor by strengthening alliances against China and imposing more sanctions. President Biden put a lot of new limits on China's access to advanced electronics and the tools needed to make them in October of last year. Because of these limits, it is very hard to get a license to sell advanced semiconductors to Chinese companies. Because of this strategic move, China no longer has access to the computing power it needs to teach AI on a larger scale. Also, the new rules have made it harder for China to hire important US workers and have put more stress on its chip supply chain. Any business that makes or processes things needs semiconductors to work, and Biden's actions have clearly put China into a manufacturing crisis. This is a major turning point in the political relationship between the two countries, and it could be the biggest move yet by the US government to stop China from making technological advances. Over time, the full effects of this move will become clear, showing how bad the damage is as China tries to keep up with new competitive countries. According to President Biden, the conflict between the US and China has grown into a bigger fight over how well democratic and dictatorial governments work in the 21st century. From this point of view, China looks like a tough guy, since the US and its partners are trying harder to get goods from other places instead of China. When the trend changes, money moves to places where the industry is doing well and out of places where it is doing poorly. This simple fact means that China is losing the backing it used to have to keep its economy going. This is the first important event that has led to China's current manufacturing crisis. The second is, as we all know all too well, the pandemic, which happened around the world and had huge effects that are still being felt today. The COVID-19 virus started a new era for global business and completely changed the way things were done before. When the pandemic was at its worst, it shut down the whole global supply chain, which hurt China's manufacturing industry. China is an important place for industry around the world, so this shutdown had absolutely terrible effects. China was one of the countries that was probably hit the hardest. The CCP's strict zero-COVID policy made it worse that many factories had to close. This strategy, which was made to get rid of the virus, made it very hard for Chinese people to go about their daily lives. The global scene had changed radically as factories slowly started up again, leaving China to deal with the far-reaching effects of the pandemic's interruption. Also, the pandemic made it clear how much many global companies depend on Chinese manufacturing. Many people were shocked to learn that their supply chains, from raw materials to contract manufacturing, were almost entirely reliant on China. Because of this, businesses tried to expand their production to lower the chance of future problems. As the trade war between the US and China got worse, both countries put tough tariffs on each other, which hurt companies in both countries a lot. This change sped up. Because of this, a lot of big businesses moved their operations outside of China to find more security. When 2019 came around, China's exports stopped growing for the first time in decades. This had effects on many different businesses. In fact, the numbers show that trade growth was very low between 2018 and 2019. This drop has been made worse by the fact that big companies are still leaving China. Omchom, Shanghai, and the Chinese government did a survey on tariffs in 2019 and found that about 40% of businesses have already moved their manufacturing outside of China or are thinking about doing so. For a variety of reasons, many businesses are moving their operations to other Southeast Asian countries. This movement of industry out of China can be broken down into two main groups: push factors that encourage companies to leave China, and pull factors that tempt them to go to other places. Let's talk about these things in more detail. Because of its large and inexpensive population, China used to be the largest manufacturer in the world. This was due to the fact that China's labor expenses were kept at a low level. Nevertheless, this edge is gradually disappearing. Because of rising wages and real estate prices, China's production costs are increasing. This is especially true in the major coastal towns throughout the country. The cost of labor has been increasing at a pace of 7% per year over the course of the past 5 years, and it is anticipated that this trend will continue. During the transition from a developing country to a developed one, China has experienced an increase in both the cost of living and, consequently, pay. Large corporations such as Nike and Adidas are heavily reliant on low production costs. Consequently, they are continually searching for more cost-effective solutions to deal with the rising costs of their operations. As the cost of production continues to rise in China, a significant number of large corporations are choosing to relocate their operations to countries such as Vietnam and Indonesia, where the cost of production is lower. These countries continue to provide production at extraordinarily low costs, especially when compared to China. In point of fact, more than a third of the exports that China has lost to the United States have been grabbed by countries such as Vietnam, India, and Thailand, which are countries in which various goods may be manufactured at a far lower cost. Although these other countries are still concentrating on typical low-cost manufacturing, China is currently transitioning toward manufacturing that produces high-value goods. There are a lot of businesses that would benefit from moving their production to these countries because of the cheaper expenses involved. This shift, which is brought about by the requirement to reduce expenses, is having a negative impact on China's manufacturing industry since it is forced to contend with increased competition from these developing nations. China's manufacturing problem has probably helped Vietnam the most. Even though China's new direction is very bold, things are not going very well so far. China has spent more than $1.5 billion on its Made in China 2025 plan over the past few years. The goal is to turn its manufacturing sector into one that focuses on high-tech, high-value industries. The goal is to encourage the creation of jobs that require more advanced skills that make the business more valuable. China wants to get rid of old low-profit manufacturing and replace it with new high-tech areas like smart appliances, next-generation IT, and advanced engineering. The goal of this change is to make China more important in the world value chain. The Chinese government is firmly committed to this new path, and they are steadily steering the industrial sector toward areas with higher added value. In the short term, though, this is making companies think twice about their position in China, even though it fits with the country's long-term goals. One of the main reasons many countries set up their first factories in China was because of its low production costs in its standard manufacturing sector. China's decision to move away from this model could be seen as an insult to businesses that were drawn to it because of its low costs. Imagine admiring someone's smile and then finding out they have braces on. While it's good for them, it takes away from the beauty that first drew you to them. Because of the insecurity that comes with such big changes in the sector, big companies are now diversifying and moving their factories to different areas to make sure they have a steady supply of goods. Because of this change, investments that could have stayed in China are now spread out in more than one place. As a result, China is losing its position as the first choice for these businesses. It's important to note, though, that China's new direction is partly caused by the fact that younger people are turning down standard factory jobs more and more. China's younger generations really don't want to work in factories. This makes the country's makers even more frustrated because there aren't enough workers to do the jobs. It's very ironic that a country with more than 1.4 billion people is having trouble finding workers. More than 80% of Chinese factories are having trouble finding workers because the situation is so bad. They are short anywhere from hundreds to thousands of workers. Often, this is 10 to 30% of the entire workforce at these companies, which causes the business as a whole to perform very poorly. The China Ministry of Education is known for making often optimistic predictions. By 2025, they think there will be a shortage of nearly 30 million industrial workers, which is more than the population of Australia. There's a good chance that the real numbers are even higher. Manufacturers can deal with the mismatch in the labor market in three main ways. They can raise wages and lower their profit margins, they can spend more on automation, or they can move their operations to cheaper places like Vietnam or India. As we've already said, these countries are becoming more appealing as places to find cheap labor. China also has to deal with demands from within its own country. Due to the trade war, local industries are shrinking and unemployment is rising. As a result, some developed countries are offering grants and tax breaks to companies to get them to bring manufacturing back to their own countries. This strategy is meant to boost their local economies by bringing industry back to their own countries. The United States and other wealthy economies are starting to follow this changing trend. Tax credits were proposed during the Trump administration as a way to encourage U.S. companies to move their production operations from China to the U.S. Additionally, Japan's $2.2 billion stimulus package aims to help manufacturers move output either back to Japan or to other places after the coronavirus pandemic and the country's over-reliance on China caused problems. These measures aren't so much about saving money as they are about dealing with geopolitical strategies and lowering supply chain risks. All of these things add to the problems China is having with industry right now. A clear change has also happened in how people feel about Chinese-made goods, especially in the US, where the trade war, geopolitical tensions, and spying claims have made ties between the two countries difficult. According to a poll by Reuters and Ipsos, 70% of Americans prefer goods made in the United States. There is, however, a persistent problem. Making things in the US or other wealthy countries is still much more expensive than sending them to Asian countries. Due to these factors, in-depth talks about the viability and effects of moving production start. It doesn't matter if production moves to the US or Vietnam. China will lose with either option. Despite China's problems, let's look at who is benefiting from the changes that are happening around it. Vietnam has emerged as a significant beneficiary as a result of the shift away from China as the destination of more than half of all imports from the United States. As a result of this enormous market potential, Vietnam's gross domestic product has increased by more than 7.9%, particularly in sectors such as the furniture, footwear, clothes, electronics, and machinery industries. 29.4% of all items that are exported from Vietnam are received by the United States, making it Vietnam's most important export market. It is anticipated that Vietnam's exports to the United States will increase by 13.6% in 2022, and the trade balance between the two nations will amount to $95 billion. China's rise to prominence can be attributed in large part to the low cost of labor in Vietnam. As a result, China is now attracting businesses from all over the world, including the United States, to Vietnam. There have been a number of large production corporations that have expressed their desire to either relocate their operations from China to Vietnam or substantially expand them. Foxconn, Microsoft's largest contract manufacturer, has reached an agreement with Apple to construct a new plant in northern Vietnam. The deal is estimated to be worth $300 million. This will result in the creation of 30,000 employees. Considering that Foxconn has already invested $1.5 billion in Vietnam, this substantial expenditure is further evidence that the company is taking these commitments very seriously. One instance that illustrates the magnitude of these investments is a piece that was published in the New York Times. The article discusses a sign that is located outside of a Foxconn factory in Bac Ninh. There is an immediate need for 5,000 workers, and the sign is already taking applications for entry-level positions that pay approximately $300 per month. There is a monthly salary of approximately $4,500 when $650 for newly hired employees working on Foxconn's assembly lines in Shenzhen and Southeast China. This is smaller than half of that amount. The significant salary gap that exists between Chinese and Vietnamese workers is the primary reason why Vietnam is a more cost-effective location for manufacturing enterprises than China. The fact that Foxconn has made significant investments in Vietnam is evidence that savvy businesses are expanding their operations to Vietnam for this reason. Both traditional firms that require a large number of workers and high-tech industries are beginning to recognize Vietnam as an important location for their operations. As demonstrated by Apple and Foxconn, the electrical and technology industry is on the verge of seeing significant growth. It is Samsung's intention to relocate the manufacturing of its displays outside of China and into Vietnam. A significant shift would occur if Vietnam were to become the leading producer of displays in the world as a result of this. Due to the fact that Vietnam has a strategic edge over China in the manufacturing sector, the Vietnamese economy is expected to experience significant growth over the next 10 years. After reaching $327 billion in 2022, it is anticipated that the gross domestic product will increase to $470 billion in 2025, and then to $760 billion in 2030. According to these data, there has been a significant amount of expansion. As a result of this rapid expansion, Vietnam's gross domestic product, GDP, per person is projected to increase from $330 per year in 2022 to $4,700 per year by 2025, and then to $7,400 per year by 2030. The local consumer market in Vietnam will become significantly larger as a result of this kind of expansion. Should these forecasts come to fruition, Vietnam has the potential to emerge as a formidable economic force and a more formidable competitor to China. With the growth of established sectors such as textiles and electronics, as well as the establishment of new industries such as autos and petrochemicals, the city will become an even more significant hub for low-cost manufacturing opportunities. In significant part, VinFast is responsible for the rapid expansion of the electric car industry in Vietnam currently. Competitors and manufacturing businesses have entered the market as a result of this, which has the potential to relocate work away from China. The recent setbacks that China has experienced, particularly the manner in which the pandemic exposed weak places in global supply networks, have made this trend even more pronounced. As a consequence of this, multinational corporations are making concerted efforts to broaden their production bases. The strategic location of Vietnam and the advantages it offers in terms of competition make it an appealing destination for this endeavor. It is conceivable that the way industrial supply lines operate will be altered as a result of this ongoing shift, which is brought about by companies' efforts to reduce the risks of catastrophic interruptions. The tensions between the United States and China in the areas of trade and technology are also getting worse, which makes it simpler to switch supply lines. Because of this, Vietnam is an even more desirable location to serve as a manufacturing hub. Vietnam is definitely going to benefit from China's problems, but it's not the only one. In particular, India is also in a good situation to benefit from China's problems. India has a big edge because it has a lot of land and a lot of young workers. India passed China as the world's most populous country this year, making sure there is a large group of workers. India has an economic edge over China because its labor is not as expensive. There are already some businesses that know about this benefit. Apple, for example, has moved some of its iPhone production to the Indian states of Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. The company also wants to make iPads in India. Analysts at JP Morgan said that India could make a quarter of all iPhones by 2025. India is playing its cards smartly by taking advantage of the weaknesses that COVID-19 showed, which hurt China a lot. It has been clear for years that Apple needs to depend less on China as a manufacturing hub. But the effects of the pandemic on the world's biggest iPhone production plant really made the issue stand out. Apple was thought to lose a cool $1 billion every week because of COVID-19 problems. That's why they want to avoid this kind of chaos again. Julie Girdman, CEO of Everstream, a platform for managing supply chain risk, said that India is a good option to China because it has a large labor pool, a history of making things, and government support for industry and exports. Foreign direct investment, FDI, is something that the Indian government has been constantly seeking. Since he took office in 2014, Prime Minister Modi has been working non-stop to bring in investment. This work led to a record-breaking $83.6 billion in FDI in the last fiscal year, which makes India an even more attractive place to make things. It's easy to see why a lot of businesses are moving from China to India. The government is friendly, the labor is cheap, and the prices of goods are low. At the rate things are going, India is set up to take a big chunk of China's business. But India isn't the only country that's getting ahead. Thailand, which isn't usually a player, is also doing well because China is having trouble making things. Thailand has been moving up the industrial ladder as Southeast Asia's second-largest economy. It has become an important place to make electronics, car parts, and vehicles. There, big businesses like Sony and Sharp have set up shop. Sony said in 2019 that it would shut down its smartphone plant in Beijing to save money and move some production to Thailand. Because of the trade war between the US and China, Sharp also chose to move some of its printer production to Thailand. These moves show that Thailand is becoming more competitive, which is bringing in a lot of international companies. Before you dismiss this trend as having only foreign companies, it's important to note that Chinese companies are also following course. For example, Jinko Solar, a big company in Shanghai that makes solar panels, is moving its production to Thailand to save money and stay out of the political trouble China often finds itself in. Thailand has seen a rise in foreign direct investment, FDI, because of these changes. Thailand's FDI tripled just between 2020 and 2021, making the country much stronger, even during the COVID-19 pandemic. As global supply chains are changed, Thailand stands to win even more as new chances arise. You would be wrong to think that was the end of Asia's story of success. There are also other countries that want to get a piece of China's business. Bangladesh is quickly becoming a major player in this field. Bangladesh has become a big player in the move away from China in the world's supply chain, and every day it gets stronger as a competitor. The country has made a big name for itself in the clothing industry, which is what keeps its economy going. Nearly 85% of Bangladesh's exports, worth more than $42 billion in 2021, came from this sector. This made Bangladesh the world's second-largest garment producer after China. Taking into account the differences in size and resources, This accomplishment is truly amazing. The main reason for Bangladesh's rise to fame is that labor prices in China are going up. Bangladesh, on the other hand, has much cheaper labor. If you want to get an idea of how much people make, the average monthly wage in China is $670 and $620 in Bangladesh. Bangladesh would be a great place for a manufacturing business to set up shop because of the differences in costs. Bangladesh has a lot of room to grow because it continues to attract investment not just in the clothing industry, but in many other fields as well. Let's talk about Mexico because it has had a lot of rapid growth. You might be pulling for Mexico if you're not for Vietnam. The country in North America is taking advantage of a great chance while China is having a manufacturing problem. Mexico is making big progress in the manufacturing market, which is directly due to the fact that trade ties between the US and China are getting worse. The United Nations says that about $27 billion in missed trade between the two countries will go to Mexico. There is some truth to these predictions. Mexico is getting a lot of investments in a lot of important areas, like food, basic metals, mining, medicines, and cars. In North America's plan to change its supply chain and become less reliant on the East by building up local production skills, the auto industry is especially important. Volkswagen has also made a big investment by putting a cool $260 million into its new global technology and business center in Mexico. With an amazing $763 million investment in its electric car plant, Volkswagen is going even further. According to Flavio Pereira, Managing Director and Latin America Supply Chain Lead at Action, working in Mexico has a lot of benefits. American companies have worked together with both Canada and Mexico for a long time, trading everything from raw materials to polished goods. India and Mexico are both expected to grow a lot, with 1/3 of the new jobs coming from the car and food manufacturing industries. It's tempting to look at the rise of other countries like Malaysia, but the main point is clear. Other countries are stepping up to fill the void left by China's weaknesses. With their competitive benefits, these countries are taking advantage of China's mistakes to grow faster than China could in the coming years. Ultimately, let's be clear. China is still the clear leader in manufacturing. China is still the best, even though new rivals are coming up. China will still be the world's industry hub for a while longer than Southeast Asia or India. The main reason for this is that these areas mostly make things that don't add much value or require a lot of work, which is exactly what China is trying to move away from. On top of that, emerging markets don't have as well-developed supply lines and industries as China does yet. This could change in the future, but for now, things are still in China's favor. China stays in the game because it is both a major manufacturing hub and a big market for these goods. Its big population and ability to spend money make it a major buyer of its own goods, which strengthens its place even more. Global companies made a huge $1.4 trillion in sales in China in 2020, which was a lot more than the $900 billion they sent abroad. This means that companies sold more in this country than they did abroad, which is a manufacturer's dream. On the other hand, over time, countries like India might be able to offer similar benefits if similar things happen. Some of China's industry problems are caused by the rise of countries like India. As other countries' manufacturing sectors get newer and more competitive, China's manufacturing business will have to see how it does. Finally, only time will tell what the full effects of this change in global production will be.